Welcome, class of 2021. I was going to open with this little joke about your senior year and how it just kind of zoomed by. But I thought about it, I thought under the circumstances, you might not find that even remotely funny, so. I know, dad jokes. Anyway, getting on with it. I was honored back in 2015 when President Oxtoby asked me to deliver the convocation address to the entering class of 2019. And I'm delighted that President Starr and the class of 21 together have given me this opportunity to share some thoughts about the already exited class of 21. So my target audience back then in 2015 was 400 nervous first years, all packed in that quaint pre-pandemic way into Little Bridges on the eve of registering for their courses. And so it seemed pretty natural to me that I should reflect on my own parallel freshman experience at Stanford exactly 40 years before that date, when I, on a whim, decided to take a class on ancient Chinese religion. And as I told that Little Bridges crowd that day, that potluck decision effectively derailed my engineering career and set me on a track that basically led me to where I am today, that is, as a professor of medieval religious history. The point of that convocation address was simple: to encourage those new students to take full advantage of the smorgasbord of intellectual opportunities that awaited them here, not simply load up their plates with foods they already knew they liked, but to try something different. My hope was to inspire some of them to set aside preconceived notions about what they were good at and to try something new. Even though I drew on my own experiences for the purposes of that address, I knew there were limits to the applicability of my own story. After all, once I took that religious studies detour, I never deviated from it. It led me straight through graduate school and helped me land my first and last job as a professor of religious history. Talk about a linear career path. But unlike me, it turns out, the vast majority of religious studies majors then and now do not end up becoming professors of religion. On the contrary, they tend to pursue careers that are anything but obvious extensions of the major. What I wanted to be able to tell those first years back then, and what I would love to be able to tell you right now, you budding alums, is this: that had I decided not to become a professional scholar of religion, my BA in religious studies would have still served me well, vocationally speaking. Pomona College is a liberal arts college. You've probably heard that before. But what exactly is a liberal arts college? It's a kind of university designed exclusively for undergraduates, one that does not offer coursework in what might be called applied disciplines. And therefore, you might have noticed, we have no degrees in engineering, business administration, marketing, urban planning, management, architecture, nursing, accounting, agriculture, law enforcement, computer programming, etc. Put differently, Pomona degrees do not come with predictably linear vocational outcomes. They're not supposed to. Instead, we put our trust in the value of learning what, for want of a better term, we sometimes call pure disciplines: biology, history, math, philosophy, anthropology, econ, music, etc. This kind of ars gratia artis approach distinguishes Pomona College from, say, Cal Poly Pomona, where applied disciplines reign supreme, and where, by the way, students are expected to declare their majors in one of these disciplines before they even apply for admission. In marked and deliberate contrast, we offer pure disciplines, and we actively discourage our students from specializing too quickly. We really want them to date around for the first 2 years before committing to a meaningful relationship with any one discipline. And yet, even at Pomona, that veritable flagship of the liberal arts, our students have a hard time resisting that siren song of predictable linear outcomes when selecting their courses and their majors. Back in 2016, Dean Audrey Bilger, now the president at Reed College, launched the It's Not About the Major campaign, followed shortly thereafter by the Liberal Arts Advising Program. You're familiar with both. Both of these initiatives were intended to broaden the conversation about course selection among first years. Dean Bilger did this to counteract a perceived growing tendency on the part of incoming students to flock to a small number of majors that seemed, at face value anyway, to be more practical. That is to say, pure disciplines that were imagined to have more practical vocational outcomes. You can probably guess the three principal beneficiaries, or should I say victims, of this demographic surge in the direction of perceived practicality: econ, math, and computer science. In the eyes of the professors who teach them, these three disciplines are pure disciplines that fully qualify as liberal arts. And yet, these same three majors have become powerful magnets over the years for students looking for something with a greater level of perceived practical application. Let me throw some numbers at you. Over the last 4 years, rather the 4 years that you were here, class of 21, econ graduated 216 majors, math 172, and CS 153. To put this in perspective, the lowest of these three numbers, that is the number of CS graduates, is just too short of the 155 students who, over the same 4 years, earned degrees in the following 20 majors combined. Here they go: sociology, dance, Asian American studies, Spanish, art history, classics, Africana studies, Ling Cog Sci, German, anthropology, Japanese, music, American studies, geology, STS, Russian, Asian studies, Chicano Latina studies, Middle Eastern studies, and, audible sigh, late antique medieval studies, affectionately known as LAMS. Dean Bilger's aim back then was not to create parity across the majors. There will always be differences in student interest, and there should be. The goal was simply to even the playing field a little bit by counteracting the effects of a form of false consciousness that was keeping some students from ever meeting the major of their dreams, much less flirting with it. But is this false consciousness really false? Is it possible that the 106 econ majors from the classes of 20 and 21 combined who are invited here today know something that the 4 corresponding Lamsters do not? Getting down to brass tacks, what am I supposed to say to that student who has fallen in love with medieval history and wonders whether she will ever be able to get a job? I could channel that Henslow character on Shakespeare in Love, ask your parents, and say, it'll work out. It always does. Or I could invoke the name of that one Lamb student and fill in the blank with the most inspirational, non-Lamsian sort of career that was spun out of a Lambs major. But here's a thought. What if I were to present my medieval curious advisee with some real data? What if, with a little help from LinkedIn, I were to conduct some research to see what our Lambs alums are doing right now, professionally speaking? A number of them are among you now, by the way. Happily, this turned out to be a fairly simple task, probably for obvious reasons. After all, Lambs has only been around for 10 years, and only in the last 8 years has it produced graduating seniors. In that time, 32 students have earned a Lambs major or minor, 26 of whom have LinkedIn pages. Of these 26, this is what we have. 1 research assistant for an art curatorial firm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, 1 pharmacy benefit manager in San Francisco, 1 product manager for a review cycle management firm in Chicago, 1 data coordinator in Austin, 1 mergers and acquisitions specialist in San Francisco. Did I get that right? 1 director of revenue operations for an oral healthcare firm in New York City, 1 public policy researcher in Hong Kong, 1 sommelier in San Francisco, 1 undergraduate student services officer at Stanford, 1 Fulbright ETA, English teaching assistant in Turkey, 1 ESL instructor in South Korea, 1 middle school social studies teacher in South Carolina, 1 trial attorney for the Department of Justice in DC, 1 assistant attorney general working for the state of Washington, 1 law clerk in the U.S. Court of Appeals, 7th Circuit, Chicago, 1 law student at Northeastern University in Boston, 2 law students at Stanford, 1 Master's of Divinity student at Duke, 1 doctoral student in philosophy at Chicago, 1 doctoral student in religious studies at Northwestern, 4 doctoral students in medieval history, Columbia, Stanford, Chicago, and USC, and 1 soon-to-be doctoral student in modern world history. So what conclusions can be drawn from this list of current occupations that might help me in that hypothetical advising scenario? First of all, that LAMS is a reasonable choice of major for students who want to get an advanced degree in a LAMS-related field or go to law school, admission to which is not linked to any particular undergraduate major. These two paths together account for 50% of my sample, 13 out of 26. Second, the second lesson, that the other 50% of LAMS alums who are not drawn to either of these options find jobs that are all over the map. That is, jobs without any obvious connection to LAMS. And one might argue that the sommelier, depending on what he thinks about when he pours the wine, he thinks about the Last Supper, then that sort of undercuts my point. It is the data pertaining to this 50% of LAMS majors, the ones whose career paths are anything but predictable, that I believe have real potential impact when it comes to easing that anxiety that the student who's fallen in love with medieval history and wonders whether she will ever get a job suffers from. But what if I were to harvest the same LinkedIn data for Pomona Econ alums, as if with an eye to advising a student curious about the marketability of a BA in Econ? Once I realized that Pomona had graduated 398 econ majors over the same 8-year period that produced the 32 Lamsters, I have to admit I shrank from that task. But something tells me that if I had all that LinkedIn econ major data right in front of me, it would show two things. It would show, first of all, that econ is a reasonable choice of major for students who want to get an advanced degree in an econ-related field or go to law school or business school, admission to which is not linked to any particular undergraduate major. And second, that econ alums who are not drawn to any of these options find jobs that are all over the map, that is, jobs without any obvious connection to econ. It is the data pertaining to this 50% of econ majors, the ones whose career paths are anything but predictable, that I believe have real potential impact when it comes to debunking the common notion that econ is any more linear in terms of its employment outcomes than LAMS. The moral of this story, unless you plan to become a professor in your major discipline, your future employers, by and large, will not care what your major was. What they will care about is that you are a product of a liberal arts college and that you took your education very seriously. They will care that you learned how to think creatively, to read carefully, to write coherently, to speak persuasively, to analyze deeply, regardless of the subject at hand. This, by the way, parallels the enduring logic of our ID1 program. It's not the subject matter that makes for a critical inquiry course. The subject matter is simply the whetstone on which we expect our first years to begin sharpening their intellectual tools. As alumni who are already 1 year out, you members of the class of 21 have some of your own qualitative data to add to my little study. Many of you have already good jobs that have nothing to do with your major, at least nothing obvious. Many of you have experienced interviews during which your prospective employers neglected to ask you a thing about your major field, except perhaps to wistfully ask, why did you major in that? As if belying a certain kind of envy on their part. And it may be that a few of you are wondering now, knowing what you know a year out, why you didn't throw just a little more caution to the wind when you were deciding on your major 3 years ago. Maybe. Be that as it may, you'll soon be given a chance to reflect on your nascent career paths. That's because the college is newly committed under the leadership of our Vice President of Advancement to capture the experiences of all Pomona alums, not just listing their jobs, but inviting those alums to consider the impact that their Pomona years had in their careers, to reflect on what they might have done differently if they had those 4 years back again, and to permit that this information be shared with current Pomona students to help them make decisions informed by the collective wisdom of former Pomona students. Would this not be the most honest way to deliver, not to mention defend, a liberal arts education, harvesting the actual experiences of thousands of Pomona alums for the benefit of our current students who are trying to decide which of the 48 majors is the right fit for them? I remind you, LAMS was number 47. When I started pushing this Alumni Outcomes project back in the summer of 2016, I had hoped it would be up and running and be ready to help you, class of 21, make more informed decisions about your majors. Instead, we ran into some roadblocks, and you were left to pick your majors the old-fashioned way, either by limiting your choices to a handful of perceived safe options, or by taking the Henslow leap of faith. It'll work out, it always does. My hope is that you, as budding alums, see the value of this kind of data and that you're ready, no, even eager, to share your stories when someone from the alumni office comes calling. Because your collective stories may turn out to be the best remedy for a college that finds itself troublingly out of balance, divided between a handful of standing room only departments and dozens of others with vacancy signs blinking in their windows. Congratulations to you, the triumphant, dare I say, the virtually unstoppable class of 21. I'm proud of you all.